Hello everyone and most welcome to H748, and we're still recording here in Vårgårda at the local library. And I would like to take up a little article by Fred Alan Wolf, and it's called Body and Mind, a Cosmic Light Show. The Body in Mind. And he tries to combine quantum physics and psychology, and he shows that everything is originally light. And in certain ways that's extraordinarily interesting, because there's actually some quantum physicist who says everything is light today. I wonder whether Fred Alan Wolf knew about these people before he made his theory, which makes it even more interesting. What he wants to look at is how consciousness arises and how it communicates with the body, and how the mind itself arises in and communicates with the universe. And he quotes a biologist called Edmund W. Sinnott. I haven't heard about him. But mind is not something limited to human brain or to any brain, but its primitive beginnings are to be found in the activity of every living cell. Well, he starts this: I have a body, at least that is how I am accustomed to thinking about my physical self. I think of my collective body and mind if I were some entity, some substantive being living inside of a physical container I call my own. I not only think this, I feel sensations in various parts of my body, and these sensations tell me that I am not my body. I intuit that at some deeper level of my existence, I'm not just my sensations, thoughts, or feelings. Yet, in seeming contradiction to my experience, if I believe some scientist, I am my body and nothing more. According to modern materialist scientific thinking, somehow the I, the consciousness that provides me with, it's hard to speak sensibly about this, my awareness of my body, the proprioception he's referring to. I'm formed in a complex of processes involving subatomic cold objects, seemingly follow multiple paths as they move from place to place. Not only that, but somehow the mere act of observing such particles upsets this path. This is the collapse of the superposition he's referring to. Most interesting. And he mentions here also that he used to be a reductionist, and this is very interesting. He claims it like this, or he phrases like this: it used to be that we believed that big things like bodies were simply constructed from other smaller things like subatomic particles. And here you have universalism from another perspective, reductionism. So you can turn the whole thing upside down. You can say that the small things are actually the starting points to the big things. So universalism can actually be handled in different ways. And that makes it very tricky. That's not a general rule. What is universalism? It changes. And reductionism is about figuring out how big things works by using the properties of the smaller things. And that's the common method in physics until 1926, I'd say, because that changes in quantum physics. In quantum physics, we don't have smaller parts, and this is what Fred Alan Wolf is referring to. That it's an idea of the past, actually. he also takes up here, he's very thorough, that biology, usually when you open a study book like in this library, you will see that biology also starts with the atoms, how they rearrange itself. And one of the most sterner, well, actually the most stern of all materialists, all the reductionists, Jacques Monod, he is actually a molecular biologist, or was a molecular biologist, and he received the Nobel Prize, and he wrote a very, very interesting book where he showed how everything was reductionable. And that book is so interesting. Actually, I realized we need to borrow that book if you have the possibility. I don't remember the name, but I think he wrote just 1 or 2 books, because it wasn't his profession to write books. He was Nobel Prize laureate in chemistry, I think. I don't think he got in biology. Well, but what he wants to point to here is what he calls the observer effect and the principle of complementarity. And what he means that the mind and the body are complementary. They are, from one perspective, completely different, of different substance, the body being of a more material substance, and the I or the self being of something maybe a little less material. And although they are very different, they share traits, and that trait is the complementarity. And the complementarity is not something that can be directly observable, but we know it is there. And that is mainly because of quantum physics. But it could actually be other ways to get there. He now goes into a quote from Heisenberg here, and I love Heisenberg because he's so eloquent. He always puts it so nice. Probably sounds much better in German, but this is a quote here. A quantitative version of the old concept of potentia in Aristotelian philosophy. They introduce something standing in the middle between the idea of an event and the actual event. A strange kind of physical reality just in the middle between possibility and reality. And we're talking here about something very akin to the superposition. It's potentiality, and it's a reality, and this is in between. Before it gets to be reality, and after it was a potentiality. Just in between there. And this is something you can actually call uncertainty. And he says this uncertainty is something that makes up the world. So he doesn't say that the potentiality is the world. He doesn't say the reality is the world. It's what is in between. And that is rather interesting, because that goes hand in hand. I started to understand. I'm making intuition here. I shouldn't, but since we are lacking time here. He says, for anything to be communicated to me, to my mind, it comes via light. Nothing can come to my senses without light. Light is emitted from furniture. Light is emitted from my brain also, because you can say the neurons are handling light in a way, electricity. And since everything is light, light takes time, even though it's a very short time. That means that there is a sort of time space between what is potentiality and what is reality. And he means that reality is smack in between those. So it's not the finished world, and it's not the unfinished world. It's in between. And what he does is to show that light is in between. And consciousness in this example becomes light as well. So in a way, it's light seeing light. And this is what he means by communication. Something is perpetually communicated. And therefore, materiality in a way could be reductionist, but on a more fundamental scale, materiality is a sort of communication. The universe is communicating something to you, and you, by observing it, are in communication with your surroundings. And it has to be that way if you start with light, because light is a communicating thing. It is not static, it goes somewhere. And that is very interesting, actually, and that is not something I've thought about before, that if you start with light, the whole universe is never static. Everything needs to be communicated via light. Nothing will come to my senses without light, and nothing will happen if I don't do something with my senses, with my consciousness. So this is quite interesting, actually. So light communicates everything, and light takes time to get from one place to another. And in between there, we have ourselves and reality in the communication process. And the communication process, it's never at the stillness. Nothing is still in this picture. It's not an outside world that stopped and don't do anything anymore. The light is the thing that makes everything starts working and communicating. Well, interesting. And this is one of the cornerstones in quantum physics, and that to make what is potential into reality, it needs to be consciousness somewhere. And this is shown in another way with light, because for me to have a furniture in front of me, that light has to go into my eyes. And I have to feel it through light, heat, other things. And that all starts with light. So that's a very interesting take on quantum physics, actually. It's another way of going about the whole things. And in this way, you cannot say that the events of the world are entirely related in terms of cause and effect. The cause and effect is something we project to the world. We say that the world is constructed by cause and effect. But rather in this case, and this is completely equal to quantum physics, in quantum physics, cause and effect is an explanatory model. And it gives some results, but it's not part of reality. Whereas in classical physics, reductionism, and what people think in general, they think cause and effect is out there. And the problem with that is you mistaken the tool from the actual thing. And Niels Bohr mentioned that many times. Cause and effect is very practical, as long as you understand it's a tool. But if you start treating it as an ontological feature of the world, then you run into problem. Then you can't be able to move the tool. And I think he's pointing to another very interesting thing. That's the it's very hard to pronounce in Swedish. Participatory universe. It's a universe you are partaking in. I say that instead. You partake in the universe. You are an active ingredient. Your consciousness is what perceives the light and emits the light. Therefore, you are an active ingredient. And this is exactly what quantum physics says, that you actively observe. And it doesn't make sense, quantum mechanics, if you start thinking in terms of passivity. And it doesn't make sense if you start thinking of cause and effect happening independent on our consciousness or our observance. And I think I mentioned this one time, that if you start with quantum mechanics and try to criticize classical physics, well, that's one way of going about it, but it's not the safest way. What you should ask is a little bit like, it was actually a philosopher who asked that. And that was David Hume, one of his bright moments. And he said, whatever I look at in the universe, I will never see cause and effect. And he was looking at it and didn't find it. And the thing is, you need to ask the people who are proponents of the classical physics, where does cause and effect come from? What is reality? Isn't it something you use to make something knowable, understandable? You put it in cause and effect. You make it understandable, you could tell Kalle about cause and effect. So that's a whole other matter. Well, I think I finish off there, and I say Fred Alan Wolf is quite interesting, and the idea, it came to light earlier than the quantum physics did it. It's quite amazing. So we might get back to him. I say thank you very much and ask a very pleasant afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.